if you're directing a non-actor or if you're directing an Oscar-winning actor, the fundamentals are the same. What is this character's objective in the scene? What is the obstacle that arises in the course of the scene? What tactics do they utilize to overcome that? And how does that resolve and become the launching pad for the next scene?
Peter Sollett, it's a pleasure to have you here on Underexposed. Peter is an acclaimed film and television director whose debut feature, Raising Victor Vargas, made a big splash when it was released. Peter has gone on to direct films like Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist and TV series as well. So for those unfortunate souls who have not yet seen Raising Victor Vargas, could you please give us a brief summary of what the movie's about?
Sure. It's a coming-of-age story set on Manhattan's Lower East Side. The protagonist is named Victor, and he sees himself as a bit of a playboy in the neighborhood. The irony, of course, being that he's, 15 years old. When he is exposed as hanging out with an unpopular girl, he feels he needs to take action to protect his reputation.
I've heard that this movie is at least autobiographically inspired, and I'm just curious to know kind of where the idea came from for you and also how you found your way to filmmaking.
When I was at NYU for a thesis film, I did a very unoriginal thing and wrote about my first kiss in an autobiographical way. That took place in Brooklyn and Bensonhurst. And the casting process took us to Victor Rassuk, who plays Victor, and Judy Marte, who plays Judy. And we had a great experience with them, working in an improvisational way on that short film. And we wanted to continue the project, but we wanted to write more directly towards their experiences based on what we were learning about them and learning about their lives. And that became Raising Victor Vargas.
The cast that you mentioned before is beyond incredible. From what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you went through kind of a traditional casting process at some point and then switched to more like flyers and street casting. Is that right?
Yeah, basically this technique that we use in Raising Victor Vargas, we developed during the making of the short film, which is called 5 Feet High and Rising. And when we were at NYU, we did what we were taught to do. We put ads in backstage and breakdowns everywhere, and actors would come in at a scheduled time, and we would give them sides, and they would read us the sides. And I found it very difficult to determine who was right for the film. And the reason I couldn't make that determination because what they were doing was reading and not acting.
Right.
If somebody's reading from sides, what they're doing is interacting with text on a page. And what Eva Vivas and I, who I made that film with, both of these films with, what we realized is in the waiting room, when we would stand there and watch them or go to call in the next person, we would realize that they were perfect when they were not reading. Everything about them was authentic. Some of them were the types of people we were looking for. Some were not, but it was way clearer who had something to offer the film when nobody said action. So what we did was we stopped giving out sides, and we would have actors come in. And, remember, these are actors that are between 8 and 7 and 16, 17. And I would direct them differently, and I would give them an objective without telling them what the scene was going to be about. And as a result, all they really could do is pull from their own lives and use their own tactics and apply them to the character in a given situation. And then everything that we got was authentic, but it wasn't necessarily the scene that we were trying to make or the scene that was essential to the telling of the story we were trying to tell. So then I had to give them a little bit more information to sculpt what they were doing. But at its heart, that process gave us more credible performances and invited them to participate more directly in the scenes. And we ran with that.
And so when it came time to shoot additional takes or turn the camera around or these things, like, did they settle into a rhythm or how did that work?
Well, what we did was extensive rehearsals. So, we would sort of shape a story event, shape a scene. And then, but really before it was perfected, I said, all right, let's move on to the next thing. And then we'd be on the set and I'd say, remember, we were doing that improvisation where you were trying to get his phone, you were trying to get her phone number and you were trying to get him away from you. And they'd be like, oh, yeah. And we'd start to shoot and I'd be reminding him of what we discovered in the rehearsal while we were rolling. And the answer is the different angles didn't cut together very well because continuity was not great. So it dictated some of the editing. But I think what it gave us in terms of credibility and spontaneity And also, not to be overlooked, quality listening on the part of the actors listening to other actors within the scene, was well worth the continuity challenges.
The way that I found my way to this movie, actually, now that I'm remembering, is me and my young film friends were really interested in David Gordon Green, and you worked with the cinematographer Tim Orr on this film. I wanted to know about that collaboration. What was it like to work together on this?
Well, it was the first time I'd ever worked with a cinematographer, because my shorts before that I had shot. So I had a lot to learn. And this was only Tim's second film. So we were definitely learning on the job. I think probably me more than him. There was, the matter of shooting on Super 16 millimeter in tiny apartments in an improvisational way. Mm-hmm. I loved his taste. I loved what he did with George Washington. That's why I wanted to work with him. And I really loved him. He's a great guy. But I think it was a change of pace for him, shooting CinemaScope, shooting 35 millimeter CinemaScope. It'd been wide open fields with available light, waiting for the right time of day where the light was, just cresting along the horizon, is a very different thing than, me stuffing him into a bathtub because we're shooting in a practical bathroom with a miniature 16 millimeter camera. But we found our way, and I'm incredibly grateful. The film looks beautiful. He did a great job.
It does. It looks amazing. What are those lessons that you learned? You said you learned some. Do you remember anything that in particular that you learned on that shoot?
It was the first time working with a crew of a reasonable size. Before that, I'd only made student films, so the crews were 3 or 4 people tops. So I learned a lot about how to lead. And also I was 23. So, also just being a professional and recognizing that I was working with people in a work environment was something I had to adapt to a little bit, how to communicate concisely and effectively, how to be decisive, how to play different roles in different relationships with different people based on what they needed in terms of support. All of these things were a part.
I think when you look at this movie, you think it must have been influenced by like Italian neorealism and the other types of neorealism that broke out after that. But I read in interviews that you weren't particularly interested or inspired by those things, that you'd mentioned like Bergman and Fellini.
Well, the thing that I love so much about, there's so much I love about all of them, but one of the first things that comes to mind when I think about Bergman is how incredibly concise and precise he is. There's the idea that directing is distilling, that any storytelling is distilling. We're coming up with a character's complete life story, and we're still going to distill that down to a singular objective in one duration, continuous duration, well, maybe duration, continuous or non-continuous duration of time as they're pursuing that objective. You have to omit so much from a life story. And I think he can do that in such a powerful and poetic way. And in terms of Fellini, obviously, there's so much cinema magic that comes to us from Fellini and in so many styles when you look at him over the decades. I suppose one of my favorite things about Fellini is how he reminds us that in a specificity we find the universal. What do I know about, being a paparazzi in La Dolce Vita? Nothing. But he tells you these stories with such heart and compassion and imagination and specificity that they translate. They translate everywhere. I think when I gave interviews about Vargas, I had also, dipped into to Rossellini and De Sica and Visconti and some British neorealism, and some American neorealism. But, I think what I was commenting on who was really making my head spin at that time. And they still do.
And I think that this film, I don't know, I would make the case that it sort of helped usher in this period of American neorealism. Ramin Bahrani, Kelly Reichardt, Sean Baker, the Safdie brothers all came a short while after this film came out. In the years since, I think there's been this obsession with escapism, particularly when things get tough. People like to say, well, people just want to escape. But I'm of the mind that I think that too much escapism has sort of led us to where we are, and that it might be nice for us to have more realism of the type that you can find in Raising Victor Vargas in movies like that. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or opinions about the role of realism in movies, if it's still something, if it's neorealism is still an impulse that tugs at you, or if you're just on to different styles at this point.
Yeah, it certainly does. They were doing a Mike Lee retrospective at the American Cinematheque here, 2 weeks ago, leading up to the new film, Hard Truths, which was so yeah, obviously head and heart are still there. I've been lucky to have the opportunity to work in different styles, which is something I wanted to do in my career. I didn't want to be forced to only tell stories in one way, and I love a lot of different kinds of films. Look no further than my references to Bergman and Fellini. I do wish there was more of that style out there. I think what we get is we get a lot of handheld camera work, and we see focus pulls, and we see some stylistic remnants of that visual approach in some action films. But, working in the traditions of that style, is not something that we see much of anymore. And I would love to see more of it. And I'd love to work more in that way. It's something I think that is particularly challenging to do in a corporate filmmaking setting. One of the things we do when we're making something realistic in that style is embrace the unexpected, be it what's going on, on the street, or what's going on with a lesser experienced actor or a new actor or a non-actor. And when a script is really agreed upon and locked and litigated, it can be hard to embrace, to pursue the magic. But I love it.